So I started this company with my brother. He's an aerospace engineer. And this was 4 years ago when we got our first investment. It was very small. And we hate beards. So he said, let's not shave until we're ready. And this has been 4 years and 1 month. It's also a beard shame because we thought we'd be ready a lot quicker. But yeah, at least it's the quickest investor update, just a selfie. Anyway, I'm here to talk to you about what we do, because we could have done many things, but we chose this because we believe it's going to have a very lasting impact on how the world operates. And before starting, we noticed several trends, and we saw how they can converge and fit into each other, and using some technology, accessing technology, we could maybe try to reverse some of these trends. Trends like the fact that, for example, even a country like Bulgaria, which happens to be the poorest country in the European Union, has almost all of its roads already paved, whereas countries which are experience tremendous economic and demographic growth do not have that luxury to build those roads, because even in when you think of countries like Ghana or so on, the cost of a 1 kilometer, one lane could reach $500,000 or even $1 million. So it's very prohibitive to build out all the ground infrastructure to serve all the communities in a lot of countries right now. But going back to the basics, trade has always fascinated me. I studied economics, and it's one of the earliest features of humanhood, right? The reason we're here is because we don't make our own clothes. We're not self-sufficient. We exchange. We specialize in what we're good at, but we exchange with everyone else to get what we lack and what we need. So in the few decades, we've experienced tremendous increase in the speed of trade, facilitated by technology. So in terms of communication, before you had to send and wait for responses for a catalog in order to sell something, then with the first wave of acceleration came with the internet, you were now able to publish that catalog online to create an online store, and now you can even, directly connect with the seller. The seller and buyer can directly connect visually using point-to-point and peer-to-peer technology. So similar growth in two phases has been experienced in payments. Again, the first acceleration came from the fact that the internet just enabled payments to be processed a lot quicker, and now with cryptocurrencies, they're very overhyped for some of you, but they're still a way that you can actually transfer value almost instantaneously. And so these two barriers are removed now, right? You can establish trust with someone on the other side of the world, someone from Bulgaria, someone from wherever, and you can also pay them. But if it's digital goods, that's great because you can also transfer them immediately. But if it's physical goods, it's not like that. When you think about it, the trucks that we drive, they move at the same speed that they moved back in the 50s, right? Same thing with the trains. But not so much actually with the trains. That's been one increase, but the biggest actual increase in moving atoms has come from deregulation and new models. So for example, the hub and spokes model for distribution, pioneered by FedEx and then copied by everyone else, made next day delivery possible. But we're still not near as instantaneous as we could be, and part of the reason is that we still insist on humans to travel with the vehicle, with the cargo. And the problem with air cargo specifically is that it's very, very expensive. You have a few very big, very expensive airplanes costing you tens, if not hundreds of millions. So each of your increments is tens or hundreds of millions of dollars. And you fly them between the most expensive real estate in the world. airports, right? Very big, very expensive airports. So 99% of shippers choose not to have their goods touch an airplane because it's so expensive. And this is why actually in terms of value of those goods transported by airplanes, that's 35% of global trade. So it's a sizable difference from the mean. And the opportunity in leveraging automation to bring it to aviation comes also from another like force of pressure, which is first, the populations in countries in Asia and Africa are going to experience a lot more middle class growth, and that's going to mean, because of the distances in those geographies, Boeing and Airbus both projected 3/4, so 3 out of 4 people in each country on those 2 continents, which represent more than 10% of human population, will take at least 1 flight per year. So we need to create, we have only less than 20 years to create 3 times more pilots than we have currently today. There's one of 2 ways this could happen. We could either lower the bar for becoming a pilot, which no one wants to do because aviation has the best safety, and no one wants to be the guy to risk that. Or you could start introducing automation in the cabin. So the FAA was authorized by Congress, I think last month, to perform a study on single pilot cabin operations for freighters in the US. So if Congress mandates, a good sign that this will become a reality in the next couple of years, that big freighters will be operated by single crew member on board. And yeah, the other big force is that the internet really continues to spoil us. Amazon is teaching everyone that shipping could be free. It cannot be free, right? There's a cost. There's even on the basic physics level, there is a cost of moving those atoms. But more than that, people are starting to realize that it makes no sense to wait more and pay more. So there's this tremendous push on, I don't want to pay for shipping, but I also don't want to wait for it. And if I'm going to make a compromise, it has to be either or. So in order for drones to be relevant, they need to fulfill 3 requirements. First, they need to be smaller than big freighters. This is because big freighters, you know, when you have a 30-ton machine or ton machine, it's very hard to fill it consistently day in and day out. The only way you manage that is through pricing, which means you leave a lot of money on the table. But I'll give you a number. 52 actually is optimistic. The average industry load factor is 46%. This means 54% of aircraft space, freight space, is empty on the average aircraft, which means somebody is paying $2 where they could be paying $1. The other big constraint is that you need to make the freighters, those mini freighters, unmanned, right? So if you're going to optimize, you need a smaller building block, but those smaller building blocks, they need to be disassociated from the humans. The humans can stay on the ground, but they do not need to travel with the vehicle. You don't need a chaperone for packages. And of course, none of this would work unless it's cheaper to own, to operate, to create. And I'll get back to that in a second, but the largest military drones that we know of are the largest drones that we know of are military, and because those programs were created at a time where not as much technology was readily available, and because for military, low but never the biggest priority, there was, you know, the cost of a Predator drone is easily crosses beyond the 7 digits. But a Predator drone has the capacity of 1% of a, for the same price you can buy a 737 used, convert it, and fly it 100 times, not an exaggeration, 100 times more. So when it comes to e-commerce, there's a lot of problems that happen on the ground. Aviation, being the most scrutinized industry, is really doing a good job, but typically in air cargo, the average journey of a shipment takes 7 days, which is mind-blowing. We fly on those airplanes. We know it doesn't take 7 days to get from one point to another on the globe, but the airplane journey is just less than 20% of that. And there's a lot that is going on that we don't know about, or it's very hard to track
when it happens on the ground. When the first and last mile are done with any means, that means that because it's much easier for me to create a trucking company, to buy a couple of trucks, I'm most likely not going to have the money or the desire to spend in a lot of like IT, so that my systems talk to the airline system, and that's the reason why, unless you use one of the integrators, FedEx, DHL, or UPS, you're not going to know where your package is. You have to go through a freight forwarder, who's the entity that organizes all that for you. But that also means that air is losing a lot of advantage. And with aviation, with drones, you could change that. The drone that we're working on is in this category, flying once the cargo arrives in the city, in the capital of the country, then we need to take it to the next on the next leg of the journey, to the nearest to the destination small town or small city. From there on, it could be still delivered on the ground by or it could be carried by one of these small drones, kind of like Zipline, Matternet, and a lot of other companies. But I'll give you an example. So in a country like Cameroon, where there are 30 million people and growing fast, it's one of the fastest growing e-commerce markets, but I'm sure a lot of people haven't heard of. You could get tremendous savings in terms of time when you go by air. The infrastructure is not there, the geography, the climate, all these are things that prohibit fast delivery by ground. So what ends up happening a lot of times is, especially in countries like that, your shipments are cash on the means that the longer you wait as a customer, the more likely you are to just return it, say, I don't want it, or I spend the money already, or I'm just, my family doesn't let me have it anymore. So that's why e-commerce isn't growing even faster, because when it takes you 7 days to receive your package, you're more likely not to do that. This is the drone that we're building. We call it the Black Swan because we wanted to fulfill not one but two constraints. We want it to be cheaper to operate, but also cheaper to produce. The unit cost it needs to be $1,000 in order to be relevant, because it carries only 800 pounds and it can fly 1,500 miles. So the interesting thing about our design is that we really, first of all, it's not a vertical takeoff. We realize that if you're going to have e-commerce, you want regularity. If you're going to have regularity with some infrastructure, you're going to have some regular points where you drop off. So the vertical takeoff is a trade-off where you waste a lot of energy, for which somebody has to pay, versus being able to stay cheap, but also fit in the same operation model. So I'll show you a quick video. We've been testing. Sorry. I don't even. Okay. Yeah. Sorry about that. So this is a small scale testing with. It's 13-foot wingspan, just enough to carry the avionics that we needed. And it was important because in all of Bulgaria, 7 million people country, member of the EU, there's 0 wind tunnels. So this is actually our way to validate the loss calculation. We found out that we get about 40 miles per gallon. We use gasoline, like Sudip mentioned earlier. We use gasoline in order to achieve that long range. But gasoline is also important because in a lot of these communities that we are going to serve, the quickest way to, or the only way to produce electricity to charge a battery would be to pour a fossil fuel into a generator anyway. So even there, electricity is not exactly being green or fossil fuel free. We also realize that we have to build more than just a drone. We have to have a concept of how or who is going to. Right now, we are working on a minimum viable airport concept where we're identifying what's the minimum amount of infrastructure that you need to roll out at, let's say, 20 at a time or 40 at a time, small airfields. A country like Kenya, for example, has 400 airfields. You can start from there instead of capturing new land. But for countries like Cabo Verde, for example, which are on islands, it will be useful also to have this land on water. So we're working on that as well. We are also developing a way to craft at the same time, and it is going to take some dialogue with the regulators. The challenge here, I'll get to that in a second, is that regulators across the world have very different opinions on how drones should enter the airspace in their countries. Of course, there are a lot of challenges to this model of having hundreds, if not thousands, of aircraft flying between hundreds of airports within your country. You certainly cannot manage it the traditional way, the way you've been doing that until now. And the questions are, how do we get there? The force of, well, the economic forces are strong enough to make it possible. We've spoken to quite a few regulators, more than 20 countries, and overarchingly, there's a very big need for this. So the question is not about if, but when. There's so many benefits. You get to, when you accelerate trade, you reduce inventory, you reduce spoilage. Right now, in order for you to receive 8 roses in Amsterdam, you need to send 12 from South Africa. And you lose those 30% of shipment on the ground, just getting to the airport in Africa. So again, replacing those long-haul journeys on truck with a drone where you can manage the climate, where you can manage everything, can introduce a lot of savings into the economy, a lot of opportunities, and increase consumption and growth. So there's not a lot of reasons to make people wait for that. We are talking to regulators, like I said, airlines and airport management companies, because the way aviation works is very protected sector in almost every country. Richard Branson was not allowed to own more than 24.9% of his airline here in the US, and it's similarly in other countries. So the way we're approaching this is we're establishing partnerships around the world with local airlines, regional airlines, to create domestic networks. And once prototype next year, once I shave, my brother shaves, we'll be able to test that in at least 2 countries in Africa, 1 in Asia. We're working on Latin America. We're building all this in Bulgaria. It's a country that 80 years, 80, did not have an aerospace. Even though in the very early 20th century, it was the first country that had an airport. It was the first country with a female fighter pilot, and had a lot of firsts. Thank you. It wasn't me, right? Yeah. Our team is largely Bulgarian. We have quite a few advisors from around the world. We just joined an accelerator in the UK, and because EasyJet is a partner, and even though they don't do cargo, they're very excited about working with us. And we're hoping to make this a reality as quickly as possible. Because like they say, a mile of road can take you a mile, but a mile of runway can take you the whole world. In our case, you just need 400 meters, so that's a quarter of a mile. And that's it. Thank you.